All right, so now we are going to start to look at what happened to Africa during the new imperialism. And for a long time, West Africa was really the only part of Africa exploited by the Europeans because of the slave trade. But you get to the mid 1800s, there's the decline of the slave trade because most European countries have made it illegal. And in the United States, it was still legal to own slaves, but it was illegal to import new ones. And of course, after the Civil War, it was illegal to own slaves at all. So there's a decline in the slave trade. But since Europeans were already familiar with West Africa, right, they began to conquer West Africa and exploit it for its natural resources. So you look at the map here, you look at the Gold Coast right here, right, and that was owned by Britain eventually. Same with Nigeria, Sierra Leone. And you can see other countries get involved, particularly the French. Get involved with French West Africa, and they began to conquer it and exploit it for its natural resources. And as you look at the map, you can tell that almost all of Africa eventually is going to be conquered by the Europeans. Look at North Africa. Britain gets heavily involved in parts of North Africa, particularly in Egypt. Egypt was a brand new country at the time. This is modern day Egypt. It was founded by a guy named Muhammad Ali. He led a rebellion against the Ottoman Empire, and Egypt broke away from the Ottoman Empire. And Muhammad Ali led that rebellion, and he goes about creating modern day Egypt. And Britain becomes heavily involved in Egypt because of something called the Suez Canal was constructed. Look at that map again. The Suez Canal is in Egypt, and it connects the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Right? So it creates this huge shortcut. So instead of sailing all the way around Africa to get to Southeast Asia, particularly India, if you're Britain, you could just sail through the Mediterranean, down the Suez Canal, down the Red Sea, and there you are. So Britain starts to rely heavily on the Suez Canal. So much so that Britain decides that they need to protect the Suez Canal, and they decide that the best way to protect the Suez Canal is to simply take over Egypt, and then also take over the Sudan underneath Egypt as an extra layer of protection. So Egypt becomes a victim, basically, of this canal. Britain takes over Egypt because of this canal. But remember, this is a time of rivalry, so France begins to take over parts of North Africa as well. They take over Algeria, Tanzania, and Morocco. That's one reason why, if you visit some of these areas, you'll hear French spoken. Or if you visit France, you'll see people of Algerian descent living in France because there was a bit of a cultural exchange back and forth during this time period. So you can see Algeria, Tanzania, Morocco there at the top of the map. Eventually, Italy as well gets involved. Or tries to get involved. It doesn't go well for them. Italy decides that they want to conquer Ethiopia, which is right there. So Italy attacks Ethiopia and loses, making Italy the only country to be defeated by an African power. So Ethiopia remained independent because it defeated Italy. It became one of two independent countries. The rest of the continent was taken over by Europe. But there were two countries that were independent. One was Ethiopia, and the other one was Liberia. Now, Liberia was created with the help of the United States after the Civil War. The idea was that it would be a home for freed slaves to go to, that they would leave America and go back to Africa and live in Liberia. So that's called Liberia, liberty. And it was an independent country. Now, this idea of having former slaves go back to Africa, it didn't work. Most of the former slaves in the United States, they were like third or fourth generation living in America. Africa was not necessarily their home anymore. So it was not an idea that had a lot of success.